Okay, welcome back to members of 121 Community Church in Grapevine, Texas, and our ongoing study in Paul and the Faithfulness of God by N.T. Wright. We're going to take a look at the Roman world view now, the Roman world model. We've already taken a look at the Jewish, we've taken a look at the Greek, and now Professor Wright is going to take us into the Roman worldview that Paul confronted and the imperial cult within the Roman world. Let's begin by looking at block 1 on the left. And during this elongated exile of oppression, the Jewish leadership would turn to apocalyptic writings. Because Octavian became emperor of Rome, Jewish leadership enlisted the scriptures in order to read the signs of the times. They took up the apocalyptic prophecies of Daniel, and Daniel presented an ordering of 4 world empires, and the final kingdom would be God's kingdom that would rule over all secular empires. The time of the monstrous empires would be overthrown eventually by the coming Son of Man, according to Daniel. Also, the book of 4 Ezra took significance. Its apocalyptic writing became important to Jewish leadership. Rome was depicted as the monstrous eagle, which is eventually overthrown by the messianic lion of Israel. It even specifically stated that the eagle is the 4th kingdom of Daniel's prophecy. Therefore, it further reinforced the Jewish anticipation of the coming messianic Son of Man who would deliver Israel out from under this elongated exile of oppression by Rome in their own land. So Rome is evolving as a world empire, and Jewish leadership is remaining resistant by holding on to apocalyptic prophecies and not willing to be taken up into Rome's syncretism. Now in block 2 we're going to take a look at the eventual movement toward Octavian taking over as emperor. Rome's historical narrative remained turned inward toward itself, and with its emphasis on a sovereign ruler as Jupiter's substitute on earth. The emperor was Jupiter's substitute on earth. It was a sacred imperial cult that evolved. Initially, Rome settled on 2 consuls as governing body, but then came the civil wars and rule through military might, and then basically, Rome's historical narrative was really always pragmatic and egoistic. Always egoistic, and never in possession of an ideology that could overpower the egoism and the arrogance that dictated the way that the history of Rome would evolve. Eventually, after the civil wars, Pompey the Great ruled with the additional allies of Marcus Crassus and Julius Caesar, and eventually from Pompey the Great, we get to Octavian as sole ruler of Rome. But with all of this, if we take a look at block 3, the resistance of Jewish signification and identity and Rome's emerging world empire led to oppression under a single sole ruler of Augustus, and that is Octavian. Octavian took the name Augustus, which meant the Exalted One. His title was Emperor Caesar the Exalted. Octavian also appointed himself governor of all provinces, and then he appointed regional governors under his leadership. Herod the Great was appointed for Judea. Octavian also self-appointed himself as Pontifex Maximus, or the high priest of the Collegia of Priests, naming himself and electing himself the substitute for the Most High Jupiter on earth. In an additional egoistic manner, he also proclaimed that he had brought justice upon the earth, and he named the goddess of justice as also under his dominion. So Octavian took the name Augustus, meaning the Exalted One, and he also took over an overruling governorship over all governors in all regions. and he took over the religious leadership of high priest. So we can see there's a very dramatic difference in Jewish apocalyptic narrative and Roman egoistic narrative. They both made up Paul's world. So the Jewish leadership had the apocalyptic sacred scriptures, which helped them to muster up hope in the midst of this Roman oppression. But Rome always evolved in an egoistic way. Rome always turned inward toward itself and was thriving on egoism and military might and arrogance. And that was further reflected by the emperors, who claimed divinity for themselves and even took up the position of not only political leader but also religious leader by claiming to be the high priest of the collegia of all priests. So it was very much a lineage of arrogance and pride that brought forth eventually Octavian, who took on the name of Augustus. But it was always a very egoistic historical development for Rome. But we're not going to leave it there, because we're going to go on and take a look at how this imperial cult unfolded with the triad on the right. So let's take a look at block 1 for the triad on the right. And we're going to go from Tiberius to Vespasian. Under Tiberius, all power lay with the emperor. His successor was Caligula, the well-known evil Caligula, who is assassinated in AD 41. Then came Claudius. He was poisoned by his second wife because she had a son named Nero, who she wanted to move up as emperor. Nero was tutored by the Stoic philosopher Seneca, but he committed suicide in AD 68. Vespasian eventually, after much civil war and infighting, Vespasian overthrew Rome. His son Titus is the one who put down the rebellion of Judea in AD 70. His son Titus destroyed the temple. Now Josephus actually defected from the Jewish military and became an advisor to Titus. And this is when the book of Daniel regained prominence. Josephus even viewed Vespasian as the promised messianic king that was to be raised up out of Judea. So Josephus even voluntarily became an advisor to Titus. So that's the lineage of how the emperor lineage was unfolding. And again, it was unfolding through egoism and military power. But now we're going to take a look at how this emperor cult unfolded. And if you look at block 2, we'll take a look at the role of rhetoric and the role of iconography. Under rhetoric, Rome, in its self-appointed egoistic task, posited through every avenue possible the proclamation that the imperial dynasty of Augustus has ushered in a new moment in history. They claimed that Augustus had ushered in a new age, a new moment in history. And that became Rome's rhetoric of Augustan dynasty that they would posit and promote. Rome also posited an ongoing material iconography of Augustan dynasty, and that included the Temple of Apollo, which became an iconographic structure. And under Octavian Augustus, the Forum and the temples gained central prominence. And we need to look at the significance of the Forum. It displayed statues representing the entire history of Rome. And additionally, the Temple of Mars was enjoined with it in order to symbolize the god of vengeance and Augustan military might. The iconographic message was that a new day had dawned for Rome through Augustus. The iconography of the altar of peace was also present, and it displayed the fruits of peace in its carved side panels. And you had the iconography of the goddess Roma. She stood triumphantly on a pile of arms, symbolizing the dominance of Rome's military strength. The shield of valor and the laurel wreath were further personal icons that were presented to Augustus. The Augustus coin had on one side, Son of the deified, Son of God, Son of the deified. On the other was his image. So even the coins stated that Augustus was Son of God, Son of the deified, Son of Jupiter. And then his image was on the other side of the coin. So in block 3, we'll take a look at this evolving imperial cult as culminating with Octavian, who renamed himself Augustus. If you look at block 3, Augustus became the fulfillment of the Roman narrative, and he was perceived as Jupiter's viceroy. There was a great output of literature. The golden age of Latin prose emerged. History was metaphorically represented as a sequence of gold, silver, bronze, and iron. But more importantly for us, N.T. Wright says, Augustus is portrayed as Jupiter's viceroy. The emperor became perceived as Jupiter's substitute on Earth. Jupiter's substitute on Earth was the emperor. Augustus does on Earth what Jupiter does in heaven. The hymn of the New Age was written and performed frequently, defining Augustus as the heir of Aeneas and bearer of peace and prosperity, as the substitute for Jupiter on Earth. And that's how we get this emergence and evolution to the imperial cult. And we can understand that how these political positions get confused with religious positions, because you have the emperor claiming that not only am I emperor, but I am also, in a self-appointed way, I am high priest over all of the collegia of priests. I am also the substitute presence of Jupiter on Earth. So there was always this tendency of an emperor on the very verge of claiming deity for himself. And literature in the day took up that position, and there was much written to lift up and honor the emperor as one of the gods on earth, or as the son of a deity. And so we've got a good visualization now of how this all took place and how it emerged. Another great teaching from N.T. Wright, but he's letting us know that that the Jewish leadership did cling to apocalyptic literature during this time, because they did not accept the defilement of the temple. They did not accept Roman corruption. They did not accept Roman leadership claiming divinity. And so they held close to the apocalyptic prophetic works of Daniel and 4 Ezra, and looked for the coming Son of Man who would overthrow Rome and purge and cleanse all the defilement that Rome had brought into Judea. So you had that resistance from Jewish leadership. You had a strong resistance to this oppression of being put up and just upset with this elongated exile of oppression under Rome. And so there's a real anticipation for the coming Son of Man. But then on the Roman side, you have Vespasian showing up as emperor, and even getting Josephus to defect and become an advisor to Vespasian, and believing that he was the promised messianic king to be raised up out of Judea. But Rome continued to posit their spoken rhetoric, which proclaimed their Evangelion gospel, that the emperor was to be deified. And they also had many statues, many icons that they put in all of their provinces. There was always a statue of the emperor. There was always the coins that were minted. And we know that Augustus had a coin minted that said Son of the deified on one side and his image on the other. So the Senate usually did proclaim an emperor to be deity after their death, but many, many times the arrogance of the emperors and their egoism would lead them to actually claim deity during their lifetime. And they claimed things like, I am the high priest over the entire collegia of priests. I'm also emperor, I'm also high priest, in the same manner that Augustus did. So many of them had that same egoistic temptation. Rome's history unfolded as a inward turning upon itself in arrogance and pride, and growth only through military strength. Strictly pragmatic, no ideal, no ideology that they even took up, because even the god Jupiter was represented on Earth by the emperor. The emperor was the substitute of Jupiter on Earth. You can see how this imperial cult kind of merged the, remember the Greek Zeus was the Roman Jupiter. So Rome not only rewrote the sign for the Greek god, but then they said that the emperor was the on-earth substitute for Jupiter, for Zeus. So we can see how this really was very prevalent in Paul's day, and what he had to deal with, this real mixture of the political and the religious, and this arrogance of Rome in every missionary journey that he was involved in. That's going to wrap up this lesson, and then we're going to take a look at our recall triad. That'll wrap up this lesson on 279 to 301.